if you could.
Recorded just started.
Thank you so much. Well done. I also ask that everybody have their microphones off. Faye is doing a great job with tech, and she will try to mute anybody who has their mic on, but do be conscious of that. If you have a question or you need help with tech, you can message Faye Mock directly, and they can take your question. And if you, let's see, that's for tech issues. But if you have a question that you'd like to ask the candidates, here's how it's going to go. We're going to have a section where each representative from the hosting organizations will ask the candidates a question. And after that, there will be an open forum. So if you'd like to ask the candidates a question, please wait for that open forum and then use the reaction button to raise your hand. For those of you who don't know how to do that, what you can do is you can go to the bottom of your screen, and at the bottom of the window, there will be a option on the right next to the leave button that says reactions. You will click that and you will raise your hand. So a bit about how this forum is going to be structured. Each candidate is going to be given 1 minute to do an opening statement. Then there is going to be questions from all of the hosting organizations, and candidates will have 1 minute to respond. The order has been predetermined, so we're going to, a different candidate will start at different times. Then we're going to take questions from the audience, and there will be 1 minute closing statement. I have been in contact with the candidates. They have been informed about the type of questions they will be asked, but they have not been informed about the actual wording or the actual question themselves. Let's see, anything else? Well, I think that's about it. On my end, I'm really glad to see such a great turnout. San Leandro is a really important place. I love you. This community is amazing. It's good that we're all here learning more about this election and asking the questions that matter to us. So without further ado, I want to introduce Leslie Robertson. She's my former colleague on the Community Advisory Budget Task Force. She's the secretary of the San Leandro Democratic Club. She's an amazing member of our community, and she's going to be moderating the rest of this candidate forum. So as that happens, I have one, sorry, Leslie, I'll let you do it in just a second, but I have one more announcement for the candidates. This is how we will be keeping time. I will have a timer, and I am going to be holding up cards. We have a blue card for 1 minute, then 30 seconds, then 15 seconds, and then I'll do a countdown on my fingers. We are going to be strict with the time just so that we can get going with this forum and make sure everybody has equal time and opportunity to speak. Great. Okay, Leslie, the floor is yours and the candidates, and let's have a good forum.
Great. Thank you, Selena. You're very kind, and I'm very pleased to be here to put on this for the San Leandro community for 8018 so that people know what the candidates are about and what they stand for and can make an informed decision at this time of this special election. So we're going to start now with the introductions of each candidate. So we're going to do it in alphabetical order. So I'd like all the candidates to start in the order of James Aguilar, Victor Aguilar, Mia Bonta, Eugene Canson, Janani Ramachandran, and then Malia Vela. So let's start with James.
Sure, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Aguilar. Thank you for holding this space. I'm excited to get to the questions and to be able to talk about my candidacy. But I was raised in Oakland. I was raised in the Diamond District, just a walk away to Glenview Elementary School, a bus right away to Edna Brewer Middle School. I'm a product of Oakland Public Schools, but we lived under a landlord, my family and I, that didn't care that my mom was experiencing health issues or that we were low income, struggling to make it every month. And so we decided to get out of there. We came to beautiful little San Leandro, and now we've been here for 9 some years. And this is where I've cemented myself in my career in not only education, but in the nonprofit sector. And I'm proud of the work that we've done in San Leandro Unified School District as a trustee, and the work that we will do together in the California State Assembly. Again, thank you for this space.
Thank you, Victor.
Hi, everyone. My name is Victor Aguilar. I am running for Assembly in District 18 because I believe that every Californian deserves universal health care, affordable housing, and justice. That's just not a slogan. Those are my core values. I was raised in a union household by parents whose families immigrated from Mexico. My parents taught me how to respond to hard times with a love for family, community, and a passion for social justice. As San Leandro's first openly gay vice mayor, I have championed progressive policies that make a long-lasting difference in people's lives, from hazard pay for grocery workers to rent stabilization and civilian police oversight. I will fight tirelessly in Sacramento for universal single-payer healthcare. I will champion affordable housing. I will be a voice for racial, economic, and environmental justice. Visit victorforca.com to learn more. Your vote has the power to make change. Vote for victory. Vote for Victor. Thank you, everyone, for your support and the opportunity to be here in my hometown of San Leandro.
Thank you, Victor. Mia?
Hi, I'm Mia Bonta, and I'm running to give a voice to all of the East Bay children and working families left behind by this pandemic, while millionaires and billionaires kept getting richer. In Sacramento, I will further advance the progressive legacy of our district in fighting for social, racial, environmental, and economic justice, and to seek structural change for our communities that for far too long have been without the resources that they need and the opportunities to ensure that they thrive. My ability to hit the ground running on day one comes from my lived experience as a proud Black Latina, the daughter of activists, raised by a strong single working mother. And my mother taught me to seek justice through service and fueled my over 20 years career advocating for students and working families in our East Bay community. I've seen firsthand how the systems in our state have let us down, and I'm working to make sure that in Sacramento, we can continue to fight for our East Bay communities and ensure Californians of all backgrounds get a fair shot.
Thank you, Mia. Eugene?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eugene Canson, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here and engage in this forum. I'm a public health professional who is passionate about addressing the health and social inequities that have long existed in our communities. The coronavirus pandemic shined a bright light on the vulnerabilities that exist due to structural racism, decades of underinvestment and disinvestment in marginalized communities. Throughout my professional career, I've worked diligently to support marginalized communities and uproot the structural racist policies that continue to harm so many of our communities throughout the state. I recognize that public health voices and ideals need to be elevated in the legislature. We have chronically underinvested in public health and the social determinants of health. And as a state, we have yet to declare racism a public health crisis, which it most certainly is. Assembly District 18 is home to some of the worst health and social inequities in our state. I'm running for the seat to be a voice for equity and ensure that all of our communities have access to opportunity, longevity, and prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. Janani?
Hi, everyone. My name is Janani Ramachandran. I'm a social justice attorney and a former home visiting community health worker. And I'm running for state assembly because we don't need just another Democrat bought by special corporate interests. We need a leader who's going to fight for true progressive change, which is why I am fighting for a $22 minimum wage, because it is unacceptable that half of Californians living in poverty work a full-time job. I'm fighting for stronger statewide tenant protections, which I've done the work for as a former tenants' rights attorney. I'm fighting for a Green New Deal with the racial equity lens, Medicare for all, and ending qualified immunity for cops who cause harm. I'm proud to have the support of the California Democratic Party Progressive Caucus, Our Revolution California, Indivisible East Bay, ILWU, Congressman Ro Khanna, and so many for environmental justice groups and so many others who believe that this is the moment to fight for progressive policy changes that we need. If you believe that this is our moment to join us.
Thank you, Janani. Malia?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vice Mayor Malia Vela. I have served for the last 4 years as a council member in the city of Alameda. I'm a workers' rights attorney who has devoted my professional life and service to making sure that we are uplifting working families, working people, and making sure that they get fair pay for fair work and have a safe working conditions. I'm also the mother of 2 young children and a professor at Mills College in Oakland. I have worked very hard as a council member to make sure that we are addressing our housing crisis, adding more affordable housing units, making sure that we're taking care of our unhoused neighbors, and helping everybody see an equitable and just recovery to the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to make sure that we take this fight to Sacramento and make sure that everyone in Assembly District 18 in Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro, where I was born and raised, has somebody who's not only going to be a voice for justice, but a champion for progressive values.
Thank you, Malia. At this point now, we're going to start with the questions from each of the host groups, beginning with the group that I'm representing, the San Leandro Democratic Club. And the first question is this question will start with the same order that we just went in, beginning with James. So the question is, $15 per hour isn't a living wage in California or in the Bay Area in particular. As Assembly member, what will you do to push for a minimum wage of $20 or more per hour? James?
Yes, I strongly believe in increasing the minimum wage by $22 by 2030. We can do it. We have to push in the legislature. But beyond a minimum wage, the state of California needs to adamantly look toward a universal basic income in the state of California, because minimum wage is not enough. When we hit $22 an hour, that is still not going to be enough for those who are going to be hurting with the increased cost of living in the state of California that's driving people out of our state, driving people out of our beautiful city of San Leandro. So I will fight hard for that $22 an hour by 2030 and make sure that along those lines also fight for UBI for all Californians.
Thank you. Victor?
Thank you for this. We have a supermajority, and we need to hold progressive values and make sure that we ensure Californians receive a livable $22 an hour minimum wage. We are one of the richest states in the nation, and we need to make sure that we are taxing the rich, that we are raising taxes on large corporations and the mega rich to help support this. We also need to make sure that we mandate equal pay for equal work. And we need to make sure, like someone like me who has student loans, my husband and I both have student loans, we need to support student loan forgiveness programs and ensure that Californians also, receive a livable wage. We need to make sure that we're also extending stimulus and job benefits during COVID-19 and this pandemic. But I wholeheartedly support a $22 an hour minimum wage.
Thank you. Mia?
I absolutely support and will do everything in my power to ensure that we have a $20 or more minimum wage. Raising the wage in California has been something that last time we were able to approve to ensure that the minimum wage increase also included automatic increases based on inflation, which was long overdue. I also supported local parcel tax measures to be able to ensure that in our school district, we actually achieved the $15 an hour for our educators. That was long overdue to them. And I was proud to be able to do that work, and I will continue to do that kind of work in the California State Legislature. Our people deserve a fair wage, a living wage. That wage is not what we receive right now, and I will work tirelessly to ensure that we have that opportunity.
Thank you. Eugene?
Yeah, so I strongly support efforts to raise the minimum wage in many places throughout the state, including the Bay Area. We know that $14 an hour or $15 an hour isn't enough to meet basic living expenses. We shouldn't live in a society where folks work a full-time job and still have to struggle to get by. All right, so I would be a strong advocate to raise the minimum wage to at least $20 per hour. But I also believe that we need to ensure that folks who aren't able to work have a guaranteed income. So I believe that we need to continue to expand UBI efforts, but also need to ensure that folks who are able to work and are willing to work have access to jobs. So I support the Future of Works Commission's recommendation to ensure that we have a guaranteed jobs program in California by 2030. And this is something that Dr. King has really has advocated for. And I think it's critically important that we move forward on that mission and make that a reality.
Thank you. Janani?
One of the core parts of my platform is implementing a $22 minimum wage by 2022. And in fact, my campaign has launched a petition for a 22 minimum wage that has received tens of thousands of signatures till date. And I care because, like I mentioned before, California has the highest effective poverty rate in the nation. And 50% of Californians living in poverty actually work a full-time job. And three things that I'd say to naysayers who don't believe that we should be raising minimum wage. One, wages have remained flat for too long. The bulk of Californians' real wages has remained completely flat, yet the top 5% wages have increased by 45% in the past 3 decades. Second, raising the minimum wage helps our economy. Creating a more thriving middle class helps small businesses, allows people to have more disposable income to be able to spend on their local communities. And finally, Californian taxpayers have been subsidizing large corporations who are able to pay their workers' poverty rate wages for far too long.
Thank you. Malia?
So I've worked very hard on the Fight for 15, not just here in California, lobbying legislators, but also throughout the U.S. And we know, obviously, that minimum wage isn't enough for our families. But we also need to, and I am committed to fighting for a $22 minimum wage by 2030. But that's only going to be helpful to our families if we also have healthcare, universal healthcare for all, so that people aren't having to expend their resources on high medical bills. Making sure that the money that people are actually bringing in is going to pay for all of the other things that they need to pay for. We also need to make sure that we are building enough affordable housing and making sure that we have tenant protections so that people, again, aren't spending the bulk of that income on housing. They can actually afford to live in California. So I'm committed to fighting for all of those things, just as I have been as a council member.
Thank you. We now will turn over to Sirlene Grant with a question from Unity in the Community.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Unity and Community is an organization, a grassroots organization in San Leandro that is fighting against racism and bigotry in our local community, all over, but we're really, focusing right here. So my question is a two-parter. What ideas or proposals will you carry to the Assembly to address racial tensions and racism, cultivate inclusion, and promote systemic change in our local communities? And the second part of that is, what have you done in your current life or professional positions that would indicate your success with such ideas or proposals?
Okay, we'll begin with Victor.
Thank you for asking that question, Sirlene. I think what we need to do is, I believe in racial justice, and that's part of my platform. And, we need to make sure, that we're supportive of movements and organizations such as Black Lives Matter that expose disproportionate discrimination, and also working with programs like Unity in the Community to help understand, and Justice for Stephen Taylor to build those relationships. We also need to make sure that we're doing and eliminating fees and fines which disproportionately impact people of color. We need to make sure that we have public banks, and working with the community to push forth with homeownership. We need to improve access and resources such as healthcare and healthy food for underserved neighborhoods. And what I've done here locally is work with various organizations to make sure that we're holding our cops accountable, and making sure that, there's justice for Stephen Taylor and Grandma Addie. Sorry for your loss. We've been working hard to make sure that, justice is being served on this end. And so, I've done work locally.
I just want to make a note that the time has run out, and that it's now Mia's turn to speak. And I just want to make sure, Faye, would you, this isn't to be harsh on any candidate, but Faye, would you make sure to mute folks when the time runs out? Awesome, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mia, you can start.
Thank you. I will continue to fight for justice and to stand up for against AAPI hate, elevating our Black voices and protecting Black and brown lives, and protecting our LGBTQ community, and ensuring that we have pride and rights as we move forward. I've advocated for our immigrant community. I've fought for social justice, and the way that I've done that in my current role as Alameda School Board President is I've made sure that representation matters. I fought for candidates who have been LGBTQ, who would have been first LGBTQ candidate, AAPI candidates in any election. I've always walked through a door and looked to be able to lift and bring people through that door, as my parents did as part of the Young Lords Party. And I've ensured that we need to focus on things like making sure that race matters. We have a Prop 209 on the books that keeps us from actually recognizing that our housing, our education, our work, and our economic justice relies on a system that fails to actually recognize that race and racial inequality is something that we've been struggling for far too long.
Thank you, Mia. Eugene?
Yes, and I'm definitely a strong advocate for racial justice, and I will continue to be. One thing that I believe and know to be true is that in order to really move forward and address these issues, we have to acknowledge it. So in the legislature, I will, introduce proposals and initiatives to first acknowledge the policies and initiatives that we have implemented as a state to perpetuate the racial inequities that we see in our state. Then also investing in our communities and addressing those inequities and redressing the issues that have existed. One thing that I'm doing now with the California Black Health Network is co-sponsoring a budget ask the Health Equity and Racial Justice Fund, which would provide funds for community-based organizations to address some of these racial inequities and social determinants of health, as well as address the systemic inequities within our government. That's something that I will continue to push forward. Hopefully it passes soon, but that is something that I've been working on diligently during my career in the past few months.
Thank you, Eugene. Janani?
Racial justice is not going to be a hashtag when I'm in the legislature. It's not going to be just hashtag Black Lives Matter or hashtag Stop AAPI hate. Racial justice is going to be a lens that I view for absolutely every single issue. And I first came to realize how important intersectionality when it comes to racial justice is when I worked as a community health worker. Black mothers are 4 times more likely to suffer maternal mortality rates. And that's not just about 9 months of prenatal care. That's about the toxins in their air that they breathe. That's about whether or not they and their children have access to healthy food. That's about whether or not they grew up in a household with violence. So I'm going to think about racial justice, certainly when it comes to healthcare, certainly when it comes to environmental justice, because we know that the first places that emission-free buses go to are the hills, not the communities that need it the most. And what I've done in my life before, I have been on 3 different nonprofits boards, including in this district, that do restorative justice and anti-violence work, and I've always brought the lenses of my identity to this work.
Thank you, Janani. Malia?
We've been working very hard on racial justice in the city of Alameda. I strongly supported the creation of community-led groups to specifically discuss how we could reimagine policing, how we could make sure that we're enacting anti-racist policies within our city, and really focusing on race and equity as a whole. I think it's really important that we center BIPOC voices in this conversation and make sure that we actually implement. We've been voting to implement many of the recommendations that have come across. We also need to make sure that we're declaring racism a public health crisis at the state level, and make sure that we are implementing all of the recommendations coming out of the task force that was established by our legislature on reparations. Unless we put money behind the things we say we care about, we're not going to see the change that we really need to see.
James?
Racial justice has to be integrated in every single thing that we do and every single conversation that we have as a legislator, as elected officials in general. We have got to work with our community-based organizations to really uplift the voices of our communities. They are the closest to our communities and those who will get the work footed on the ground and work with our legislature to make sure that we push for the policy that we need. We need to start to unwind the systematic barriers that come before our Black community, become before communities of color. You know, it's ridiculous that there are barriers to becoming a teacher, barriers to entering education, barriers to making change in the state of California. And that has got to end. So, you know, I'm proud to have been a part of some amazing work in the school district, bringing racial justice as a lens as a whole, and making sure that we move with the tides of education for racial equity.
Thank you, James. Our next question comes from Patty Breslin from San Leandro 2050. Patty, you're muted.
But of course, couldn't actually get it right the first time. So thanks for being here. And I also have a bit of a 2-part question. So what specific actions will you take to assist the cities in your district achieve the greenhouse gas emissions necessary to achieve the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions necessary and to support green local jobs?
Okay, we'll begin with Mia.
I think the 2 parts are ensuring that we have an economy that isn't dependent on fossil fuels. And so we need to focused on ensuring that we're building up our green economy with the Green New Deal and other aspects of that to ensure that workers have the ability to have a pathway through just transition to to jobs that will enable us to be able to not rely on greenhouse emissions. In our district, we have the Oakland Port, we have the Oakland Airport. We have so many different parts of the community that are affected by the impacts of greenhouse gas emissions, and we need to ensure that we're creating more dense housing to ensure the transportation impacts and the emissions that come from heavy work zones don't end up making it possible for our children not to be able to breathe clean air, and for our communities to be continue to have to live in toxic environments.
Thank you. Eugene.
Yeah, so I would strongly support the Green New Deal, right, in efforts to phase out fossil fuels and build clean energy. But one thing I know and that we all know is that environmental issues and environmental justice should be a priority in the legislature, right? So we know that climate change disproportionately impacts communities of color and communities already living with outcomes of long-term systemic racism and injustice. And we see that right in West Oakland, we see that in San Leandro and throughout the district. So I strongly support efforts to address those issues, the Green New Deal, but I also believe that we need to ensure that environmental justice leaders have a seat at the table where environmental decisions are made, right? Including folks in our district that are doing this work on the ground. Their voice should be heard. So environmental justice concerns also should be embedded in our state's climate policy, and I'll work to ensure that that takes place.
Thank you. Janani.
Yeah, I would absolutely support not just investing in rebates for electric cars. That's one part of the solution, but we really need to invest in high-speed public transportation that's emission-free, and not just in areas that are privileged and wealthy, but those that are most impacted by the harms of environmental injustices. We also need to hold corporate polluters accountable. I supported AB 1139 and believe that we need to continue to build upon measures like this so that corporations can and will disclaim the amount of toxins that they are releasing into the air and the harms that they are causing. I also believe in the need to expand CCAs. It's not good enough that those who are wealthy that can afford higher rates for their gas and electric bills pay higher amounts to obtain renewable energy. We need to expand CCAs for everyone. And there are 4 environmental justice groups which have endorsed me because they know that I am going to be a climate champion and prioritize the environment, not just sideline it.
Thank you, Janani. Malia.
As a council member, I voted to enact a climate action and resiliency plan that is award-winning and sets out an ambitious goal of reducing emissions by 50% below our 2005 levels by 2030. It's this kind of goal setting that we need to see at the state level. We also need to make sure that what we are doing, we do keep a lens on equity and justice. That's why I have supported SB 342 to make sure that there's representation from the communities that are hardest hit on things like the air quality boards and air quality districts. I think the other thing is we know that our largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions are single occupancy vehicles. So we need to see investment in fleet transformation to 100% electric. I also passed legislation that requires 100% electrification for all new housing. We need to see that plus decarbonization for all new construction, as well as an investment in public transit that's emissions free.
James.
Part of the problem and one of the barriers that we have to ensuring that we actually pass a Green New Deal, in which I am in absolute full support of, and I would love to co-author in the Assembly, is the fact that our legislators are beholden to organizations like PG&E and major polluters like our fossil fuels. So we have got to not only divest from fossil fuels, but take fossil fuels and PG&E out of politics completely. And then when we do that, we can work on a Green New Deal that will have a massive infrastructure overhaul when it comes to transit, expanding transit to make sure that we get more people off the streets in their cars and into BART and into AC Transit, so that we're utilizing the systems that are built to protect and mitigate the climate crisis. We also need to make sure that we decarbonize, of course, housing and development, so that we better move forward on these issues that we all talk about, and have that lens of the climate crisis come into everything that we do too, because we know that the climate crisis is going to affect all of the future generations, including mine.
Victor.
Thank you. You know, here in San Leandro, what we've done is we joined a growing coalition of cities working to make a 2030 100% zero emission vehicle sales goal a reality. You know, what local governments can do in becoming leaders in reducing greenhouse gas emissions is by becoming more efficient. We need to make sure that, you know, we're encouraging employees to shut off electronics when they leave their offices for the day, for several hours during the day. We need to make sure that we're encouraging employees to eliminate or reducing idling vehicles, including reducing warming up or cool down times. We need to end fracking. We need to have a commitment to exceeding carbon emission reduction goals for our state. We need to make sure that there's funding for cities and counties to aid local mitigation and resiliency efforts. And I've been instrumental in declaring a climate emergency here in San Leandro and working closely with those teams. We also need to make sure that we're beginning the transition to public ownership of the California power grid.
Thank you. We'll now turn to Selena representing Slate.
Hi, welcome candidates. San Leandro for Accountability, Transparency, and Equity is a grassroots policy advocacy group in San Leandro, and we have been campaigning for police oversight here in the city for over a year. Efforts to create effective police oversight in San Leandro have really been complicated, and not just by our city charter, but by state law that limits what we can make transparent, as well as the police officer's Bill of Rights, what we are able to disclose and what we are able to do once that information has been disclosed. There's a lot of reform efforts happening right now, but what is one policy that you would introduce in the assembly to increase in the assembly, and how would that policy increase accountability, transparency, and equity in policing?
Let's begin with Eugene.
Yes, definitely. This is definitely a critical issue. And one thing I want to state is that I would be a strong advocate to provide and ensure that there is oversight committee in our cities, to address the structural issues within law enforcement and our departments. We must show political courage. And one thing that Dr. King stated is that, on some positions, it's necessary for the moral individual to take a stand that is neither safe nor politic nor popular, but he must do it because it's right. And so we have to look at see what is the right thing to do, right? And so something I'm supporting now, and if it doesn't pass now, this session, I will continue to support moving forward is Senate Bill 2, right, to ensure that there is accountability, one, in our state. And it's unfortunate that in California, we're one of 4 states that doesn't have a law in the books that allows for a police officer who commits an act of misconduct to be decertified. That's an issue that we need to address, and something I will be vocal on and supporting now. So that's one of the issues that I will continue to support.
Janani.
I would, there were 1,172 people last year who were killed due to police violence, and extremely few of those police officers had any sort of sense of justice. So few families have had a sense of justice. And I would work on 3 specific policies that could help us achieve a sense of justice. One is making sure SB 2 is passed and expanding upon that, so that police officers can't be fired from San Leandro Police or Oakland Police for killing someone and then rehired in Vallejo or Modesto. I would work on eliminating the police Bill of Rights, so it's not so hard to access critical police records. SB 1421 was a good start, but having served on the Oakland City Public Ethics Commission myself, I know that even when it is lawful and when police are required to turn over records, they so rarely do when citizens actually demand it. And finally, I believe that the state can play a role in strengthening and helping local jurisdictions, supporting expand police commissions, and provide alternatives, including APTV's MH First program that I volunteer with.
Malia.
I'm endorsed by the Coalition for Policing Accountability, and the reason for that is I had been championing this issue at the local level and working very hard on bills like SB 2 to make sure that we have a decertification process, and we're not one of 4 states that doesn't have that. But we also need to go further. We need to make sure that we reverse the Copley decision. Up until the last couple of decades, there was transparency in the state of California. With Copley decision in place, makes it very hard to actually access records and make sure that we can have the accountability that we need without that transparency. Additionally, just like the state is considering legislation to remove exclusionary zoning provisions from city charters, the state really needs to look into, by right, creating community oversight commissions of police departments so that we don't have to go city by city, charter by charter in a very expensive and cumbersome process.
James.
Yeah, first and foremost, one of the solid things that I will do in the assembly is support SB2 and get it passed immediately. Then we need to move on and ensure that we are fighting for the elimination of the Police Bill of Rights. You know, it's a barrier, it's a blockage to a lot of the work that we have to and can do. And of course, I think one of the major things that we need to look at as the state of California is empowering local jurisdictions, so our cities, Oakland, Alameda, San Leandro, to establish police oversight commissions across the board, comprehensive police oversight that is headed by our residents, headed by our local communities, so that we're holding our departments accountable from the ground up in a grassroots way. So the state of California needs to step up and put its money where its mouth is and actually get footed on this conversation.
Mia. Oh, did I go to the wrong one? I'm sorry.
Up next.
James.
Victor.
I'm sorry, Victor. I'm sorry. Proceed. Sorry.
No worries, Leslie. Thank you. You're doing a job. So, you know, here locally, we need to make sure that we support SB2 so that, you know, cop killers such as Stephen Fletcher don't, you know, retire from San Leandro and go work at the sheriff's department. This is something that we need to hold people accountable for. You know, during my time as a San Leandro City Council member, I've worked closely with residents to support the creation of civilian police oversight and other policies that reimagine and prioritize public safety. We need to make sure that we're holding police accountable for their misconduct, that we're working with the community to advocate. We need to make sure that we have investments in public health and social services and working on prioritizing restorative and transformative justice programs. We need to abolish the death penalty and decriminalize certain hallucinogenics and support SB 519. And we need to expand legal protections for vulnerable populations.
Thank you, Victor. Mia.
This question was about police accountability. We all know that there is very little to no trust between our communities of color and law enforcement. And that has been a well-earned distrust because of the lives that we've lost at the hands of police. You can't have trust without accountability and oversight and transparency and the consequences for officers and law enforcement agencies and for our officers to be held to account when they transgress and commit crimes of misconduct against our people. I would ensure that we have a broader definition and broader access to public records to ensure greater transparency of personnel records for police. I would support the expansion of the categories of police officers' personnel records to ensure that. I would ensure, along with SB2 and Senator Bradford, that we continue with the decertification process and that we move towards a statewide investigation, independent investigation framework so that every city and county doesn't get to choose how they're going to hold police to account.
Next question will come from Addie Kitchen, representing Justice for Stephen Taylor.
Morning, thank you for inviting me. My concern is the Assembly Bill 118, which is the Community Response Initiative to Strengthen Emergency System. That's the Crises Act. I believe that if we would have had this, if we would have been able to have mental health first come out and to assist people that are in a mental health crisis, my grandson would have not been murdered. He was in a mental health crisis when he was murdered. So my question to you is, how will you support Assembly Bill 118? There are so many families that have been impacted by victims that have been murdered by law enforcement. So we're asking that you support this bill. We're asking that you fund this this bill in the California budget. So my question is, how supportive are you of Assembly Bill 118?
We'll begin with responses from Janani.
I was extremely supportive of the version of the Crisis Act 1.0 last year. I'm a part of the Healing Together Coalition spearheaded by the Men and Boys of Color Collective. I've been part of justice teams and a proud volunteer with APTV's Mental Health First programs. And I believe in the Crisis Act so strongly because I have seen survivors of domestic violence and individuals in mental health crises be failed repeatedly, time and again by our police. We pour in funding funding to these systems that do not serve our community members. We know that if an individual of color, particularly, is experiencing a mental health crisis, calling the police can be a death sentence. And it is so much more likely for individuals experiencing mental health crises than anything else. So we need options. I'm horrified that the Crisis Act 1.0 didn't pass last year because our governor wanted to house it under CDCR. And this time around, I think we can get the coalition that we need to pass it and just make it a public health crisis rather than a criminal issue.
Malia.
We absolutely need to make sure that this goes through. It's only a pilot program, which is, I think, a foundation that we need, but we definitely need to start funding ways that we can provide stability and safety and culturally informed responses to calls for service. And that's where we have been failing, absolutely. It's not just that, it's that we need to make sure that we have these different levels of appropriate responses to the calls that we're getting, and that we have them, especially in areas that we know we're seeing an uptick in calls, calls for help, not calls for police. And so we need to make sure that we're funding this, but we also need to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's culturally sensitive and culturally competent, partnering with the CDOs that are already doing the work, like ATPT, that are already out there. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we need to provide the funding so that they can expand what they're actually doing. So I very much support this and supported it last year as well.
Thank you. James.
Yeah, I absolutely unreservedly support AB 1118, and we need to go beyond with what the bill's language has for us. We need recurring funding for the expansion of community-based alternatives to make sure that the police are not interacting with the mental health crisis as what happened here in San Leandro. It's frankly, I'm tired of seeing my Black brothers and sisters being murdered at the hands of police, for reasons that police should not be involved. So community-based alternatives, and making sure that we also, in the midst of that, expand mental health services so that we can better, attune and address the issues before us. It's going to take funding, and even that's going to be a fight. So we need to get up in the assembly on that green carpet and tell our stories and make sure that our communities are heard in the assembly in the process.
Victor.
Thank you. I think I wholeheartedly support this bill. We need to make sure that we build coalition around it to gain that support, and that's something that I would do effectively. I think this pilot program will provide stability, safety, and culturally informed and appropriate responses to emergency situations. And here in San Leandro, when I was a part of the Human Services Commission, we pushed for a gap analysis study, which indicated that mental health was a huge gap that was not funded and taken care of. So we partnered with the county to have a CAP program. Unfortunately, it wasn't in place. It wasn't started when San Leandro had the murder of Stephen Taylor. And so I think these programs are things that we need to support and make sure that they're implemented, so we prevent things like this from happening, killings like this from happening by our police, and work together with the community to make sure that we're addressing the needs at that specific time.
Yeah.
Ms. Addy, thank you for always asking the questions that we need to be asked. And the reality is that AB 118 is a step in the right direction. But let's face it, when we have a pilot program, what that means is we're going to seek and consider and think for a while and decide whether or not we're actually going to be able to put our face forward in terms of making sure that our black and brown brothers and sisters and beautiful people aren't killed at the hands of police because we're meeting force when we should be meeting people with care. And so I would seek to ensure that not only are we focused on AB 118, but we have an addendum to that and a new bill entered to make it a statewide policy to ensure that we have mental health care first, and a framework that allows us to be able to fund that with determination and deliberateness, so that we don't continue to lose our lives to the police, who should not be responding with force when we need people to be cared for and responded with care.
Eugene.
Yes, and thank you for the question, Ms. Addy, and also for your voice. So this is something that I support wholeheartedly, the Crisis Act. I supported it when I was working with the community health centers here in the East Bay, and I support it now with the California Black Health Network. There's a reason why oftentimes many of our communities are hesitant to call the police in issues of crisis because that trust isn't there, and oftentimes things like this happen. So one, we need to build that trust, and we need to pass the Crisis Act, but we also need to expand access to behavioral health and mental health services. Mental health issues disproportionately impact communities of color, and largely due to the lack of access to coverage and access to care. So we need to work to do that. And also need to address the stigma in receiving preventative mental health care. Largely in many of our communities, particularly communities of color, there is a stigma there. So we need to do what we could do to fund community organizations and support them that are doing the work to address that stigma. But yes, I wholeheartedly support the Crisis Act.
Our next question comes from Jackie, supporting Our Revolution.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
sorry, Leslie. I just messaged you in the chat. Janani needs to leave soon, so I was wondering if we could give her 1 minute for her closing statement.
Certainly. Janani?
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. And I just want to reiterate the reasons that I am running for this seat. I'm running because of the voices of community members that have been left out, the communities that I have worked with here in this district, survivors of domestic violence experiencing homelessness, individuals experiencing mental health crisis who are criminalized by our supposed justice system, tenants who are elderly or have children with disabilities who are being evicted even in the middle of a pandemic. Our state government lacks the empathy and compassion that we need to build a truly equitable California. And I am excited to run for this seat because of the underdogs, because of the voices of people that are left out. And I want to work with you all. Social justice movements are movements. It's not about one individual. And I want to partner with every one of your organizations that do powerful work on the ground. Some of your organizations I have been a part of, many that I have not, and I want to get to know you. And I would love to follow along. I'd love for you to follow along our campaign and join our movement for justice, janani4ca.com. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you, Janani.
And I can stick around for one more question.
Okay. Okay, so back to Jackie with a question representing Our Revolution San Leandro.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here today. I'm very excited at the turnout. And we expected Republican Governor Schwarzenegger would veto single-payer health care the 2 times it hit his desk. But the fact is, when it came back, it failed again, twice. Once when Jerry Brown was governor, and again with Newsom. It's a multi-part question. Do you believe that corporate contributions to political campaigns played any part in the failure to get single-payer health care passed in California? And do you take money from corporations and/or super PACs? If so, what companies have you taken money from? And what do you think they want for those contributions? And C, if you don't take money from corporations and/or super PACs, why not? Thank you.
We'll begin with response from Malia.
I absolutely think that there is an element of pay to play that has gone on for far too long in California politics. I've witnessed it. We've all witnessed it. And certainly we have seen politicians backpedal off of their promises, especially around making sure that we have meaningful health care for all, which is a critical issue and something that, by the way, is pulling through the roof right now in California and everywhere else, because we know how important healthcare is. I have not taken any corporate contributions. I firmly, I'm funded by working families, I'm funded by labor unions, I'm funded by individuals. And that's because at the end of the day, I think it's all about community over the capital. I do not appreciate special interests from Sacramento and from all over the state of California, especially the corporate ones, trying to weigh in on this election and buy this seat. And I think we need to make sure that we have somebody that is going to be corporate free and a real champion for this district and the people.
James.
Yeah, the first part of Jackie's question was on the overall landscape of the political environment that has prevented a little bit of a single payer framework from coming into the state of California. The private healthcare lobby is massive, and it's ridiculous that some of our legislators, a lot of our legislators, most of our legislators are beholden to private healthcare, and that's why we have had trouble passing something like AB 1400. And I would be an extreme vocal advocate for AB 1400 because I'm empowered by the experience of my mom, who's been pushed around the healthcare system. The fact that she's been under predatory doctors, the fact that prescription drug prices have skyrocketed through the roof. So I want people to have an opportunity to have free, guaranteed health care in California. And on that second part of the question, I am a corporate-free candidate. I do not take money from any corporation or any executives from corporations. I strongly believe in community-based support, grassroots, ground up community supports.
Victor.
Thank you for this. I am not in bed with corporate donors, and I do not support that. What I do support is, once elected to the state legislature, I would support AB 1400. And Jackie, you're right. Healthcare has had a huge part in this. That's why, it's important to make sure that you follow the money. First, a universal healthcare system in California would remove health insurance profits and their intended abuses from the system. We must get more aggressive in fighting the ongoing ripoffs by the pharmaceutical industry, and we must bring more transparency to this process. California must be able to negotiate directly to bring these prices down. Containing healthcare costs by regulating the prices charged by hospitals, doctors, drug companies, and insurers is essential. Price gouging is in this sector, which is rampant, and I will do everything in my power to stop this practice.
Mia.
Absolutely in support and in favor of single payer healthcare in AB 1400. And it's because of the cost of healthcare being too darn high. It's the fact that this type of proposal would end up costing us more than people in the state legislature are willing to spend, which is a serious problem. And it's because of the different federal approvals that are needed in order to be able to ensure that we have the infrastructure to support AB 1400. I also support AB 20 in ensuring that we have corporate-free campaigns, and I'd be happy to support it once AB 20 is in existence. I have taken corporate contributions. I do not take fossil fuel money, and I've taken the fossil fuel pledge, as well as no tobacco and the other corporate contributions in that regard. And I'm beholden to my mother, my family, my community, and to the constituents of this district.
Eugene.
Yeah, so first I want to say I do think that corporations play too large of a role and have too large of an influence in the legislature. And I support the Clean Money Act because just that. But California has also made strides, right, in working to ensure that residents have an opportunity to vote. And we are seeing states go in the opposite direction in regards to Jim Crow, voter suppression laws. However, in the state of California, there are significant barriers in place that make it difficult for folks to run for office. And so it was stated that racism and economic justice issues cannot be solved without radical redistribution of political and economic power. And if we truly want to allow for such redistribution of political power, I believe we need to remove those financial barriers. And I do not take funds from corporations, and largely because of that influence.
Janani, are you still with us? Thank you. We'd like to hear your response.
I absolutely support AB 1400. I've gone to CalCare rallies. I'm backed by organizations that have pushed for this, including Our Revolution California, and have fought tirelessly for both AB 1400 and its predecessor bills. The reality is over 70% of Californians support a single-payer healthcare plan. There's never been more popular support than during the pandemic, when people are losing their jobs and thinking about why on earth is my healthcare tied to employment. The fact is we have almost 1 in 3 Californians that don't have access to legitimate healthcare that actually meets people's needs. Yet we have a supermajority of Democrats who don't support and are not pushing for this powerful legislation in the way that they could. The second aspect of that question, I have rejected corporate contributions. I am a 100% corporate-free campaign because I don't want any special interest whispering in my ear. I don't want anyone in my ear except for the voices of my constituents. And that's why I have over 600 individual contributors to my campaign. This is a truly progressive, people-powered movement. And when we fight, we can win.
Thank you, Janani. Our next question will come from Faye, representing San Leandro for Black Lives.
Figure out how to pin myself out. I can't seem to pin myself. Okay, I guess I'll just speak about getting
We can hear you.
Okay, great. I wanted to ask about the immigration deportation pipeline. As we all know, there's still people in detention camps. There's still people who have spent years in ICE after being detained by various county and jails. So I want to know how you will stop that prison deportation pipeline.
Okay, we will begin with James.
Thank you for the question, Faye. First and foremost, we need to absolutely expand what we already have as being a sanctuary state. The state of California, being a sanctuary state needs to expand upon the framework that we have to ensure that we're protecting our undocumented communities and we're getting people out of detention facilities. The separation of families still continues under President Biden, and that has got to stop. Another problem that we have with California legislators is they rarely speak up to the United States government, and we need active and vocal advocates out in Congress and making sure that we are pushing the legislation at the federal level and getting our communities protected. That's going to take a fight, and that's going to take a coalition, and we need to build that coalition, and I will do it together with you to make sure that we are protecting our communities and getting people, getting our immigrants protected, and make sure that we streamline processes.
Thank you. Victor.
Thank you. I think what we need to do is we need to make sure that we end private immigration detention centers. And we need to abolish ICE from our courts and our school systems. As one of the first openly gay school board members here in San Leandro, we were able to make sure and vote that San Leandro was a sanctuary school district, meaning that we didn't partner with ICE and give any information. We have to make sure that we're here to protect those, protect our dreamers, and make sure that we are protecting those that seek the American dream and stand up and make sure that we're working closely within our community to make sure that we're protecting our immigrants. And there's a huge immigrant community here, and that's something that's what makes us unique, what makes San Leandro diverse, and one of the most beautiful cities in California.
Mia.
We need to make sure that we're enforcing the Vision Act, which enables us to be able to keep ICE out of our communities and keeps ICE from being able to coordinate with local law enforcement. We need to ensure that not only that the laws barring counties and cities from communicating with ICE gets extended and expanded to include the state, and no better place to do that than with the expansion of our sanctuary state to include our state prisons.
Thank you. Eugene.
Yes, and I will be a strong advocate to support and protect our undocumented Californians and community members. And again, we need to truly make sure that we enforce the Vision Act to ensure that that collaboration with ICE and our local governments aren't taking place. And with the community health centers, I have strongly advocated for our immigrant communities, and there's a lot of issues that are attached. And one is access to healthcare. And I want to bring this up because it's critically important, but still to this day, a large portion of our undocumented Californians do not have access to Medi-Cal. So we saw some inclusion in the budget up to age 60 and above. We need that for all of our undocumented community members. And so that's something that I've been advocating for and will continue to advocate for, as well as the protections from ICE.
Malia.
My first vote on city council was to make sure that Alameda became a sanctuary city before Donald Trump was inaugurated and made president. I have worked collaboratively with the ACLU and worked as an attorney to make sure that all of our workers, all of our constituents know what their rights are so that they can actually enforce them and have access to pro bono legal representation in the event that they are confronted with ICE. We do need to make sure that AB 937, the Vision Act, is fully implemented and enforced, meaning that our jails are not just transferring and working collaboratively with ICE. We also need to put in more state regulation and penalties for agencies that violate this. Here in Alameda County, even though we became a sanctuary state, even though we were a sanctuary county, implementation of these within local law enforcement took a long time, and we need to make sure we have implementation in full.
Our last question from our host groups comes from Mike Katzlakabe, representing SLP Defund.
Thank you. While recognizing that law enforcement is largely in the purview of the local jurisdictions, as an assembly member, what programs would you cut and what programs will you put forward that reduce the need for armed law enforcement? Please be specific.
We'll begin with Victor.
Thanks, Mike, for asking that question. During my time here in San Leandro, I've worked closely with residents to support the creation of civilian police oversight and other policies to reimagine and prioritize public safety. And I think what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're supportive of SB2 to decertify police, so that police are not going from cities like Vallejo to Modesto, when they have a reputation. I think what we need to do is we need to make sure that one of the issues is we need to have gun control, and that is by making sure that we're banning assault rifles, and that's something that I would wholeheartedly support, and I think there's some movement around it, but as somebody who who supports holding police accountable, that's something that I would support in the legislature.
Thank you. Mia.
I think first and foremost for me, making sure that police get out of our schools is a critical piece. I think we need to ensure that at a statewide level, we're not using our state education funds to be able to continue to have police in our schools where they don't belong. Our schools are places that are a place of safety and of education, not a place of force. I think any legislation that would allow us to be able to prioritize the use of police force to ensure that they're addressing violent crimes, as opposed to policing community events and community members, which is laced with bias and quite frankly racism, where people who are walking down the street, participating in parks, being vendors in community fairs, have to exist in a militarized state where there's a presence of police, and typically that often happens with Black and Brown people as the center of those places. So implementing state legislation that has cities go through.
Thank you, Mia. Eugene.
Yes, and thank you for the question. And in regard to law over policing in our communities and the militarism in our state, I really think the question is we need to look at our budget, right? And so we need to decide if we really should be spending $50 billion a year on law enforcement and incarceration of individuals in our communities. So it's a matter of values, and I think it's a matter of morality and humanity. And I would advocate for investing in our communities and resourcing in our communities rather than resourcing or over-resourcing law enforcement and over-policing our communities. Again, I believe it's a matter of values and a matter of our budget and how we want, in regards to how we want to move forward.
Malia.
As a council member, I voted to sell the military grade tank that our previous assembly member voted to acquire while he was on city council. I think we need to make sure that our funds are not being spent on militarizing our police. We also need to make sure that we are not funding officers in schools, which is why I voted to remove that funding as well. I think it's also important that we right size our departments. Oftentimes, certain departments like our police departments hold on to a number of vacancies and use those vacancy savings to reinvest in the department. We need to make sure that we're shifting those funds to mental health first responses, to crisis intervention that is non-armed, and make sure that we are actually providing the services. I also want to see more money going towards mental health resources for our youth, and making sure that we have mental health parity.
James.
Yeah, first and foremost, a vast amount of the California state budget goes toward corrections and rehabilitation, monies which are allocated toward putting our communities of color in prison and incarcerating at rates unlike any other place in the world. So with those dollars and a complete reprioritization of this conversation, we need to, demilitarize our communities, demilitarize our schools, get police out of schools, and we need to reinvest in our communities by empowering community-based alternatives to policing, by empowering mental health services to make sure that we are getting down to the conversation and actually addressing root causes to these issues.
So at this point, we will begin with questions from our audience members that have been coming through the chat forum. We're going to begin with a question from Ted Reynes, and the question will begin with responses from Mia. So Ted.
Hi. So our community fought very hard for many years to save San Leandro Hospital, and it's good that the Alameda Health System took over the hospital and preserved the emergency department and other acute care services. However, the finances and futures of the entire county health system are constantly undermined by poor Medi-Cal reimbursement rates, which fall far short of covering the true costs of healthcare services. This deprives those with Medi-Cal insurance from being able to gain appointments with most doctors and clinics. And since Kaiser and Sutter refuse to do their fair share of care for Medi-Cal beneficiaries, it falls on the Alameda Health System and other safety net providers to do their best to provide the care which many in our community need. There are now over 13 million Medi-Cal beneficiaries, so reimbursements for their care take up much of the state budget, even with the unacceptably low rates. There is not sufficient public support to pass and sustain a single-payer healthcare system in the short term, but if establishing fair reimbursement rate for over 13 million Californians on public insurance has proven this difficult, it seems it would be even more difficult to fund fair reimbursements for over 30 million Californians under a single-payer system. Sorry for the long buildup, but my question is, how should the legislature solve this problem, and how will you work with a diverse Democratic Party caucus in the Assembly to pass your solution?
Yeah.
Thanks for the question. I think you're raising not only the ways in which our Medicare patients are not eligible to be able to receive the supports because of the low reimbursement rates, but it clearly has a huge impact on our healthcare workers to actually be able to earn the living wage and the protections that they need as workers when we have these instances. I think the way to be able to create a coalition of support for single payer healthcare is to be aware of the fact that there are infrastructure and first kind of one-time costs that are necessary in order to be able to build up the single payer healthcare system. And I think that has stymied a lot of the legislation previously because we haven't really made a concerted effort to be able to fund that up front. I think we should take some of the surplus that we have in this moment and work towards being able to continue to build an infrastructure that would allow us to be able to have single payer healthcare and an actual reimbursement rates be something that we can have in the state of California. And you're right, it is going to take a broad coalition, and you need to be able to have legislators who are able to speak to everybody and who have relationships to be able to ensure that that all of their concerns are addressed. And we're going to need coalition.
Mia, thank you.
Thank you, Mia. I'm going to add 10 seconds to everyone else's answer and just ask that we don't do it to be rude, but for future questions, the candidates are muted after the time runs out.
Eugene?
Yes, thank you for the question. First I want to say it's a shame that our Medi-Cal reimbursement rates are so low in our state. That should not be. We look at it, our state, we have a primary care shortage, right, which is disproportionately impacting many of our communities, largely due to the Medi-Cal reimbursement rates that are abysmal, right? And so, we need to work to be vocal and advocate for one, addressing that piece, to bring in providers that will serve patients who are on Medi-Cal and low income and need that care, but also build a coalition that would understand the importance of looking upstream and the investments in prevention and providing that coverage in regards to single payer care. If we go that route, we will save money on the back end, but it's a matter of political will, political courage, and we have not done that in decades in regards to investing in coverage and prevention, but financially is the best thing to do.
Eugene. I'm sorry, not Eugene. Malia.
I was part of that fight to save San Leandro Hospital. I think one of the things, in addition to making sure that we actually put pressure and build a coalition to increase our reimbursement rates, is to make sure that we have more transparency. Sutter, Kaiser, all of these different hospitals and medical providers shouldn't be allowed to just hide their money and show that they're not taking patients, that they're not actually servicing the community. I represent healthcare workers. We know we need more transparency relative to the healthcare industry, to billing, to all of these different things. We also need to make sure that those bills actually go through, and that we force some of these private providers and these foundations, these nonprofit foundations, to really disclose what's actually going on. Without that, it's going to be really hard to really build the coalition collectively to show that there is a problem and make sure that we're getting the reimbursement rates that we need and that our workers deserve, so that we actually have full parity and we have full staffing.
James.
Yeah, first, Alameda County healthcare system, it's a disaster. And, as Malia mentioned, there needs to be more transparency. We need to know where our money is going. And I think part of that is going to be shifting leadership, because it's been shown that the leadership of the Alameda County healthcare system is absolutely, it's egregious what they've done and the conversations that they've had. So we need to get that leadership over to the Alameda County Board of Supervisors and do something about our system here in the county. I think, as far as AB 1400 and setting a single payer healthcare system goes, the Democratic Party has endorsed AB 1400. And so we need to use that and use the Democratic Party coalition, get more of our communities up from the ground and into the state legislature so that we can better advocate for AB 1400. And, that is going to take pressuring the governor to include some of that 75+ billion surplus to make sure that we laid the framework that can get AB 1400 fully implemented within the next 5 years or, next 2 years. We need to get it done.
Victor.
Healthcare is a human right, and every Californian deserves the ability to access quality healthcare when they need it without worrying how they will pay. I think it's imperative to protect Medicaid, Medi-Cal expansion under the Affordable Care Act, and we should examine ways to expand Medi-Cal access to all Californians. We must also redouble our efforts to educate our underserved communities and get more people enrolled and covered California. We must support the Affordable Care Act, properly staffed customer support centers as well, and make sure more access to free, fully staffed clinics in low-income communities and communities of color should be a top priority. I support comprehensive universal single-payer healthcare coverage and a healthcare cost control system for all California residents, and addressing implicit bias against BIPOC and healthcare settings. We also need to make sure that we're lowering the prescription drug prices.
Thank you, Victor. Okay, we're going to take our second question from the audience. I did just receive a message that Ms. Bella has to leave shortly. So we're going to take the question, have Malia answer first, and then give her closing statement. I see there's a question from Stephen Michael Tao. Stephen, are you here to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, I am. Thank you. All right, so this is a bit of a, a complicated question, so I'll try to make it as much as we can. So many of the problems we're talking about today have been allowed to continue as a result, continue to exist as a result of limited choices that create poor leadership over decades of successfully elected officials. It's because too few people we need in politics are able to pursue it. In San Leandro, for instance, it costs around $30,000 to run a competitive campaign for a full-time job in city council that only makes part-time pay. To that end, how will you help others climb up the ladder behind you into elected office? Will you support and champion fundamental changes to our election system, such as ending dark money, pay to play, corporate contributions, ASTRO, or special interests? Will you take action to remove barriers for BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, women, religious minorities, low income, and immigrants who wish to run? I'm specifically thinking about publicly funded elections programs that go beyond 2008's AB 583 for the California Fair Elections Act and incorporate best practices from cities like Denver and Seattle, as well as the Brennan Center for Justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Malia?
Thank you for your question. Yeah, it's super hard. And as a woman of color, I will tell you, as a woman of color with 6 figures of student loan debt and 2 young kids, I'm working 2 full-time jobs to serve on city council where I'm getting paid $100 a month. And, you know, we need to see a new generation of leadership. We need to see more people of color. We need to see, you know, more working class, regular folks to really see change. I support you know, moving California so that we would have similarity with the federal government. When you run for federal office, you can't take corporate funds. So that's a big barrier. I also support making sure that we're trying to actually publicly fund elections, making sure that we're allowing for more accessibility to run for public office. I'm going to be supporting all of that legislation because I was directly impacted by it, so I know what it's like. But beyond that, I think we also just need to move to a better place where we can be more inclusive.
Thank you, Malia. Do you want to give us your closing statement?
Yeah, I'm going to quickly just wrap up. I think we need to change some of our laws around how meetings take place and what campaign funds can also be spent on and how much people can actually put in and remove dark money. So I support all of that. My name's Malia Vela. I'm the vice mayor. I've been on city council and reelected in the city of Alameda. I was the first pregnant council member. We have no Democratic AAPI women serving in the state legislature. I have worked my whole life to really serve this district and this community, and I'm a product of this district and community. I was born and raised in Alameda and San Leandro, and I firmly believe that this district needs a champion in Sacramento, somebody who has lived experience and also the working experience, who has delivered on the issues that matter most to us, making sure that we have affordable housing for everyone, making sure that we're taking care of our vulnerable neighbors and unhoused neighbors, and making sure that we're reinvesting in the services that we all deserve, and that we also address the climate change issues that we know exist. So I hope you'll support my campaign. I'm endorsed by the Women's Caucus, the API Caucus, and a number of elected officials. Thank you.
Thank you, Malia. Eugene.
Yes, and thank you for your question. You know, one thing that is true is it's too hard to run for office, for public office. And so, like, as I mentioned earlier, if we really want to see change in our communities, we need to see a redistribution of political power and economic power. And in order to do that, we need to address some of our campaign finance laws and remove, the money in politics and that influence. Not just the influence, but make it more accessible to actually run for office. You know, I'm running for office for reasons to, I want to serve my community and be a voice for public health, but also to inspire folks behind me who see someone like me, a young black man running. I want them to have the ability to actually be a voice and run as well. So I will be a strong advocate for those behind me, as well as efforts to increase access to running for public office.
James.
Sure. Let me give you a little bit of an overview of how much this election cost. I mean, just first and foremost, up front, the filing fee for the Alameda County Register of Voters is $1,100. On top of that, with filing a candidate statement, $9,800. So if, for say, a low-income, person of color were to want to run for office, the system is built against them, even if they simply just want to make sure that they get on that ballot and they get their voice heard. it's ridiculous. So we need to completely shift the dynamic of what it means to run for office and getting people from our communities, getting working class people elected into office. So I'm going to absolutely be a full and vocal supporter of AB 20 as well as publicly funded elections, because we've got to remove those systematic barriers to uplift people to run for office at bigger rates more than ever. Things are changing, but we really need to work on it now, because we need to actually get the work done and shift the dynamic of our legislature. So actually a really great question, Stephen. Thank you for that.
Victor.
Stephen, thank you for asking that question. And James, you're right. You know, it costs $11,000 to get on this ballot with a candidate statement. You know, it's definitely disheartening and discouraging to, you know, for people of color, especially those low income, to get encouraged to run. That's why, you know, I've mentored and talked with folks just such as James and Janani to, you know, to help folks make sure that we're pushing, you know, to encourage others to run and get that support. As a city council member, I pushed for campaign contribution limits, and I was the only one in support. All of my other council colleagues voted against it. They wanted, you know, they wanted to have developers and corporations give the money, you know, and that was in January, early beginning of the year when that happened. You know, they opted out not to pursue a local ordinance. So hold your electeds accountable. Make sure that, you know, you're following the money. And I think, you know, as you know, I'm someone who encourages people to run.
Mia.
As a mother of three and somebody who had to take on 2 jobs so that somebody else in my family could run, I know all too well that elections are incredibly important. The fact of the matter is that governing is incredibly expensive too. School board members, city council members don't get paid what they should be in order to be able to ensure that they have the ability to treat that most critical job as their first and hopefully only job. And I think that there needs to be legislation to ensure that city council members and school board members and people on commissions are able to not have it be a voluntary experience because their work is too important. I do think that there needs to be campaign finance reform. I would be fully in support of any of that reform. And quite frankly, I've spent a lot of my time walking through a door and putting my hand back to lift up and make sure that other women, other BIPOC, other Black, Latino candidates would have the ability to run in races that are, of course, too expensive.
Thank you. Is Joseph Trujillo still on with your question? Joseph, if you're on, please unmute yourself. Okay. Charlie, are you still on? Charlie, did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? Okay.
Yeah, I was wondering what the stance on housing. I've heard a lot of the candidates' stance on affordable housing, but was curious into the possibilities of maybe free transitional housing for the homeless population.
Okay, we'll begin with James.
Sure. Yeah, I'll start with the latter of your question, Charlie. I definitely support free transitional housing. You know, some of my family have experienced homelessness, so homelessness is quite a close issue to me. So I want to do all I can as a state assembly member to make sure that we mitigate the issues that we have with homelessness. You know, homelessness increased 47% in Oakland just 2 years ago. It's ridiculous, and we're leaving our own on the streets without their basic needs. Regarding housing, we really need to end both exclusionary zoning and we need to support upzoning, because we have nowhere else to go in the Bay Area. We can't expand out. We have no more land. So we got to think upward and think creatively. So within the conversation on housing too, you know, supporting ADUs, making sure that we have transit-oriented development, you know, building upward with multi-use, multi-unit, very dense housing within our communities. And that's a conversation with Howard Terminal too that I would love to explore, and including incentive for transit.
Victor?
Thank you, Charlie, for asking that question. I wholeheartedly support transitional housing here in the East Bay. Housing is a human right, and the East Bay and all of California residents should not have to fight for their homes. We have to strengthen our renter protections. We need to build more affordable transit-oriented housing. We need to provide robust services to our unhoused neighbors and curb gentrification, which has displaced so many longtime East Bay residents. We need to make sure that we're ending exclusionary and racist zoning policies, which prioritize single family homes and deprioritizing mixed income, multifamily, multi-unit housing. We need to make sure, that we're these housings that we're putting at market rate, it has inclusionary housing, because if we don't, then that's a form of modern day redlining. We need to lower barriers for seniors to sell their homes. We need statewide evictions and foreclosure moratoriums during the pandemic. And we need to repeal the laws such as Costa-Hawkins and the Alice.
Mia?
And I'm going to have to sign off on this question. Ironically, I'm needing to take care of my son in this moment. So yes, thank you for the question. We absolutely need to make sure that we are able to address the, I think, 185,000 extremely low income housing units that we need in order to be able to make sure that our homeless citizens are able to have a house over their head. So I would be in full support of ensuring that we're building up our infrastructure to build out more transitionary housing. And I actually think it's one of the critical solutions that we need to fund in the state in order to be able to ensure that our unhoused neighbors are able to move from temporary transitional housing to permanent housing. I will sign off now with the remainder of my 30 seconds to just say I'm Mia Banta. I'm running for California State Assembly because I think we need a strong voice. I'd be proud to be a Black Latina with an API family that has the ability to ensure that we have a pathway to ensure that our voices in the East Bay are addressed, and that we have the kind of solutions that require us to roll up our sleeves together and be a part of the California State Legislature. Thank you.
Thank you, Mia. Benny Lee, are you still online with a
Yes, I'm
question
still
for
on.
us?
Yes, I do, right? So, I'm a child of the late 60s and 70s, right? And I could tell you it was very difficult back then. This pandemic has exacerbated many issues, and definitely inequity issues. There was a report that came out a couple of months ago that said 160,000 students have dropped out of our school systems. What policies and funding will you be advocating for and pushing through to rescue these kids and bring them back into the system and make us a wonderful state?
Let's begin with James for response.
Sure.
Sorry. Faye, which way do you want to go?
Yeah, okay, got you.
Thank you, James.
Okay. First and foremost, Benny, you are completely right. I mean, California is still 41st in the nation, which is accounting for cost of living in the entire country for per pupil spending. Yet we can spend $70,000 per prisoner. As a student board member in San Lorenzo, it didn't make sense. As an adult school board member now, it still doesn't make sense. And we have things like Prop 13 that have completely damaged not only our taxation system, but the way education funding works in the state of California. So we need to attack Prop 13, get in there and think of legislative workarounds to make sure that we are fighting for full and fair funding of California public schools. That's my one main big policy in this campaign, because we need it. When we get full and fair funding for California public schools, we're going to bring in those students and we're going to support our school districts to make sure that we are actually addressing the issues head on and putting our money where our mouth is. We say we support education, yet we spend so much on corrections and rehabilitation. So reorienting.
Victor.
Thank you for asking that question, Benny. I think, I believe in educational justice, and it's sad to hear that, students are dropping out. We need to make sure that we're, increasing employment opportunities and protections, and that we're closing the digital divide to make sure that everybody has equal access to broadband, and that's something that is preventing children from continuing on learning because parents can't simply afford it. We all saw what happened with two girls at Taco Bell trying to use the Wi-Fi. That's something that we need to make sure that we're supporting that, and we're making sure that we're also providing services for our parents to make sure that their kids can be taken care of while they go to work. We need to make sure that we have safe and accessible housing for everybody, and that we're expanding in-home healthcare options and support services, and that we're closing the equity gap in education.
Thank you. Eugene.
Yes, thank you for the question. And so again, I think it's a matter of values in our budget, right? So we know that California spends more money. One is at the bottom end of per pupil funding, and spends more money on schools that are in lower income districts. But data shows that schools in the top quartile of student poverty would need to spend 46% more to meet these students' needs. And because of longstanding neighborhood segregation and systemic racism, these high poverty schools serve primarily Black and Latinx students, presenting a serious equity problem. So there's an equity problem in terms of how we fund education and where the money is going. I supported Prop 15 on the ballot in 2020. That would ensure that corporations provide their fair share and send money to schools. I'll continue to support efforts to ensure that high earning corporations provide their fair share. But that is something that we need to look at and ensure that our funding is allocated equitably.
Thank you. At this time, we will take the closing statements of our 3 remaining candidates, and we'll begin with James.
Sure. First, thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Selena, and thank you to the whole team for organizing this. I appreciate the space. My name is James Aguilar, and I've already told you my story of being raised in Oakland, but really I'm rooted here in San Leandro with all that we've done with our community. It's been an amazing experience being a trustee and learning these things, especially with my previous answer that we're 41st in the nation, 5th largest economy in the world. So we really need to get straight with education, because if we're not going to address education, then we can't address the issues that we're talking about outside of it. Bringing a social justice lens, fighting the climate crisis. It starts from the ground up with education. So I'm in this race to be a #1 fighter for public education. I'm a corporate free candidate. I don't take contributions from any corporations or law enforcement for that matter, because I understand that we need people rooted in our community in the legislature, and we're going to do it as a coalition. So I look forward to working with you all. JamesForCalifornia.com. I'll see you on the other end.
Victor.
Hi, everyone. My name is Victor Aguilar. I am running for the assembly because I believe every Californian deserves universal health care, affordable housing, and justice. These are my core values. I was raised in a union household by parents whose families immigrated from Mexico. My parents taught me how to respond to hard times with a love for family, community, and a passion for social justice. My family are frontline workers, and I lost my loving mother to COVID-19. It was completely heart-wrenching to watch my father pour over the $800,000 bill. Without medical coverage from my mom's union job, my father would have not only lost his wife, but we would have been financially devastated as a family. To me, it's simple. California's response to COVID-19 would have been different if we prioritized people over profits. I will fight tirelessly for universal single-payer healthcare in Sacramento. Visit victorforca.com to learn more. Your vote has the power to make change. Vote for victory. Vote for Victor. Thank you so much for your support, everybody, and this opportunity to speak today.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Do we have Eugene's?
Yes.
Did I step on? Okay.
That's okay. Eugene, please share with us your closing.
Yes, thank you. And again, I want to thank the coalition for putting together this forum. I truly believe that we are at a critical juncture as a state. We cannot continue to leave so many of our communities behind. We must acknowledge that the structural inequities that exist and work diligently not only to move our communities forward, but to provide redress to the communities that have suffered the brunt of underinvestment, disinvestment, and structural racism for decades. A few years ago, I decided to dedicate my time and my energy to fight for the health and well-being of marginalized communities. And I'm thankful for the coalition of organizations that are doing this important work on the ground in San Leandro and throughout the Bay Area. And I hope you will support me in my efforts to serve in the state assembly. Thank you for your time.
Hey, Selena.
All right. Thank you so much. Wow. We have a lot of thank yous and a lot of important information to get out before we close this forum. First and foremost, I want to thank all of the candidates. It might have gotten buried in the chat, but Jackie, props. has, the representative from Our Revolution San Leandro has been dropping important information in the chat that I'd encourage people to check out, information about the candidates campaign. If the candidates who are still here want to drop their contact information in the chat for anyone who has questions that might not have been answered today, please do so. I also want to give a big thank you to the over 40 people who are here, who stayed for the forum and who are, engaged in our community. That's extremely important. I want to thank of all the organizations who hosted. I especially want to give a shout out to Leslie, who's the secretary of the San Leandro Democratic Club, for moderating everything. I want to thank Faye, who is the representative for San Leandro for Black Lives, who's been doing all the tech work. I don't know if you noticed, but all of the skillful spotlighting and muting and moving things along. They did a wonderful job there. As I said, Jackie Props from Our Revolution San Leandro has been in the chat. And then we also had all of the organizations that you heard from today sponsoring, including Justice for Stephen Taylor. So a big thank you to Miss Addie Kitchen for being here today. San Leandro 2050, thank you to Patty Breslin for representing San Leandro 2050. I have been here representing Slate San Leandro for accountability, transparency, and equity, which has been advocating for police oversight. I want to thank Mike Katz-Lakabe from SLPD Fund, and of course, Sterling Grant from Unity in the Community. So a lot of the information about the orgs and the candidates has been dropped in the chat. Jackie, can I ask you to drop the information again, just so that it's current? And this concludes the forum. Thank you so much to everyone who's been here today. And please make sure to fill out your ballots and to mail them before the 29th. So you should have gotten the ballot. I hope this was informative as you make your choice for the special election.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye for now.